Hey, welcome back. I'm Kelly from Signature Solar, and today we've got something truly exciting to share with you today. EG4 is introducing one of the highest powered inverters on the market, the FlexBOSS21, along with the GridBOSS, an entirely new and innovative product they've never offered before. And we've got James Showalter here, founder and CEO of EG4 and Signature Solar, here to break it all down for us. Thanks for being here with us today, James.
Thank you, Kelly. Looking forward to this conversation.
Me too, and I'm excited and ready to jump right in. Let's start with the FlexBOSS21. What is it? What is unique about it, and who do you see this is going to benefit the most?
Yeah, so the FlexBOSS21 is it's a hybrid 48-volt split-phase inverter. We've been in that space with the 18 kPV, but it's a new direction for hybrid inverters. We increased the things that everybody wanted a little more of. It's more powerful. I think the the function of being able to put out AC power rating of 16,000 watts when solar is present was something that people wished that we had on the 18 kPV, the extra power when solar was present. We always had a really powerful battery output, which is still the same here, which is 14.7 kilowatts for 10 minutes and 12 kilowatts continuous. And we've always had great line balance, which is 8,000 watts per leg continuous, so people can pull 66% of their power on one leg. So we went after power. That's not surprising. But what we did that is going to be surprising to people is we removed the 200 amp transfer switch, the bypass relay inside the bottom of the inverter. The inverter is now smaller. It is more powerful on the top, but the wire box is 90 amp circuitry. And that came down to a lot of system strategies we were seeing, and also a lot of people who were buying, a 10-year warranty, longer lifetime off-grid inverter for an off-grid application that did not need the 200 amp switch. So one of the coolest features as well, and on top of all of the the power increases, is actually a major price cut. I think we're dropping from $48.98 to $41.99. as the list price. So what the story on the inverter side is, we were able to come down about $700 and deliver a more powerful inverter. It also has a surge starting capacity. A lot of our people were using Sure starters for like $300 on air conditioners. The FlexBOSS21 can start a 5-ton air conditioner without modification. So 190 rotor lock amps right out of the box.
Wow, so more power, less cost.
Yes, the only thing that's gone is a 200 amp transfer switch, and that kind of speaks directly to the reason why we're releasing the GridBOSS and just are trying to grasp what the real install picture looks like for do-it-yourselfers and electricians.
So tell me more about this 200 amp bypass relay switch. So why did you guys make this design decision, and how does it affect the installation process and the cost? Yeah,
I think it goes right back to the installation process made the design decision. We are out in the field with our installers. We're going to the wire stores with them, and we're working with these guys, and we paid attention to how the 18 kPV installs on people's homes. Most people, and I think this is well documented in the 18 kPV's manual, and I think some of the other companies involved in the 200 amp inverters, they actually ask for a lot of very expensive switchgear to connect that inverter to the house. So, you're looking at a 200 amp bypass, manual bypass switch you have to install with that inverter. And you have to have a 200 amp AC input disconnect switch. These are both switches that can be somewhere between $600 to $1,000 depending on what's available to you each. And so adding that with 3/0 wire, which is not cheap, and the metal conduit and fittings for that, most installers can't get off the job site for under $2,500 of wiring parts just to hook up a single 18 kPV to your house. So we were looking at that saying, okay, there's already money on the table for this job that's being done that could possibly be done better with an integrated product like the GridBOSS. So that moves us into a design where we want to take the 200 amp switch out of the inverter, put it in the GridBOSS for less than the cost of the wiring it takes to hook up the old 18 kPV. We can deliver a solution and do a price cut on a more powerful inverter. So it's truly exciting for us, looking at that GridBOSS, it also solves a lot of applications issues that people were just settling for. Batteries are expected to be within 15, 20 feet of the meter, or you're going to spend a fortune on heavy wire going back and forth on the AC side. So for instance, so we felt like we had to try to do something, and we're excited about the product.
So less wiring, less components, and a neater setup altogether.
Absolutely. Less trips to the wire store and a lot less spent there.
Right. You're doing a lot of comparisons to the 18K. It says it's higher powered. You've got a better surge capacity. I think you've enhanced the MPPTs.
Yes.
And yet it's smaller and lighter. What kind of certifications and warranty are you offering with the FlexBOSS21?
So the same 10-year warranty as the 18K PV, and the certifications are the same stack. There's a lot of core technology that's the same in the 18K PV. This is just a next generation product, and this is, I think, what happens with, when customers have took our 18K PV, took us seriously on improving the market the way we tried to with that, and invested in us. And we take that buy-in and try to push the solar industry forward with stuff like this.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the naming conventions. It's FlexBOSS21. I know that 18K was named because of its ability to output 18 kilowatts of power by utilizing 12 kilowatts of continuous power to your loads and still being able to put 6 kilowatts of power to the batteries.
Yeah.
Can you explain how the FlexBOSS21 is able to manage its solar input and its battery storage?
Yeah, so EG4's naming profile is, I think, on the off-grid side, we are the 6000 XP and then the outcoming 12,000 XP are basically AC wattage is the nameplate. With hybrid inverters, the game is less full AC output. It's not like full send on the power you're generating, and it's much more of managing a DC load between the inverter output and the battery charging. So, the 21 can handle 21 kilowatts of DC, which is, we recommend 24 kilowatts nameplate of solar max. So most 90-some%, 95% of home systems are going to be under this threshold. So it's kind of a one-shot fits all now in terms of size, and it can, to your point, it can output up to 16 kilowatts of DC power on the AC side to feed that inverter, and it can also output up to 12 kilowatts of DC power at the battery. And so any combination of those two that adds up to 21 is possible, and it'll throttle otherwise. So we could do 9 AC and we could do 12 DC on the charging. We could do the opposite of that, or really anything that the customer wants. So it's a little beefier of a DC bus to allow for battery charging and home powering at the same time.
Oh, okay. We've talked about it being really high-powered, so I want to talk about the use cases. I think I know the answer, but I want to hear you state it. Do you see this being used mostly for residential partial home backup or whole home backup because it's really high-powered, or do you see it also being used as an application for commercial settings as well? Yeah,
so I mean, this is a whole home backup inverter. We were obsessed with the idea of a whole home backup being sold alongside of a solar sale with the installers we work with, and also do-it-yourselfers and end users that are in the solar business for real energy independence. So we have the 12 kPV, which is really our self-consumption inverter. It's significantly less on the price. But this is meant to complement the GridBOSS and just be like a one-shot solution to back up like practically all homes.
And so how does the GridBOSS fit into this scenario?
The GridBOSS is the home controller where all of this power is going to be distributed, and it addresses several concerns that you would think about in addition to the transfer switch and the AC disconnect, which we referenced, which is the initial impetus for us to build the GridBOSS. There are new electrical codes coming out that are going to expect that you have enough power to back up all of your loads on your inverter side, or you have a way to shed your non-essential loads. So that put us in a place where we were seeing customers buying smart breakers to try to, for one or two loads, to try to shed those heavy loads they don't want to back up, like typically heat strips on heat pumps. So a lot of people will just have a non-electric heating backup, and so to get through permit or to just not eat up all their battery power in a backup situation, they need to be able to shed those loads. And so we have a 4-breaker load shedder built into the GridBOSS. These are smart breakers you can control with the EG4 app, and one of them is 125 amp, one is 80 amp, and two are 60 amp. The logic with that was, the 260s can control 2 heat strips or 2 major 240-volt appliances. The 80 amp can control another major 240-volt appliance or a full power, particularly the largest power EV charger. And the 125 amp can control a sub panel or also integrate on the AC couple side. Or it can also control a large 240-volt load. So that was one of the aspects that we were trying to deal with the GridBOSS as well. Then there was kind of also the parallel problem where some people were building systems. The larger homes had multiple inverters, and in order to do that, going back to the original 18 kPV 200 amp style inverter, you were seeing people buy 200 amp AC input panels, breaker panels, 200 amp AC output breaker panels, and buying a bunch of 100 amp breakers. And it's about $800 of wiring, even if you shop smart, for all that stuff, and 3 or 4 hours of work hanging that. And with the GridBOSS, we solved the parallel issue with a single wire going between the inverter to the GridBOSS, which is a very different wiring topology than we use in the 18 kPV, as you know, which is 200 by 200. And we have 3 parallel breakers there. So we can handle up to 63 kilowatts usable DC on a single GridBOSS installation.
So is that my limit? I can only parallel 3 inverters into the GridBOSS?
Yeah, with the basic GridBOSS, it's a lot of power. I mean, realistically, it kind of maxes out. You're about 16,000 watts, which is about 70 amps, 65 amps times 3, and you're right there at 200 amps. So we didn't really see a need to put more than 3 inverters on the GridBOSS.
Sure. So I know, like with the 18K, we can parallel up to 16 18Ks.
Yes.
There's no way to parallel your 18Ks in a normal way and then put them into one of the hybrid ports.
Yeah. So the FlexBOSS, if you're talking about the FlexBOSS, we can parallel up to 16, but you would have to be involved in a breaker panel set that can combine that. Those would be really commercial scale installations, which we're putting effort in on.
Okay.
And those commercial scale installations would be, 400 amp or 600 amp breaker panels. We just kind of looked at the situation, Kelly, and said, look, if you're dealing with 200 amp hardware, you're really going to top out at about 3 inverters.
Right, and your focus was residential whole home backup. And let's say we still did want to parallel more than 3 hybrid inverters. Is it possible to connect more than one GridBOSS unit together?
So each GridBOSS unit is its own microgrid. So that's not the application focus of the GridBOSS. To put 2 GridBOSSes together, each GridBOSS is its own system.
Okay.
So you could share a battery bank from 2 GridBOSS systems. So if you wanted to have a different solar system on a 2 breaker panel house, for instance, they could share the same direct current battery bank and then share power that way along that side. But on the AC side, they're 2 separate systems.
Okay. So how are we connecting from our FlexBOSS21 to the GridBOSS?
So that is honestly the thing I'm most excited about. It is a single 70 amp service between the FlexBOSS and the GridBOSS. So because we got rid of the 200 amp transfer switch in the FlexBOSS 21, we can just use a single AC wire going back to the GridBOSS and a communications cable, which basically makes the FlexBOSS either off-grid or on-grid within a 10 millisecond window. So we can be backing up the house when the GridBOSS has disconnected the grid and the FlexBOSS is in island mode, or we can be just grid integrating and self-consuming with the GridBOSS activating its connection to the grid and the FlexBOSS just contributing power to the house.
Okay, where are those connections being made in the inverter itself?
Those connections, the AC input side of the inverter is what interfaces with the GridBOSS. So there's a whole relay matrix above the AC input ports that lets it phase change. So that leaves the only free lug is the AC output.
Okay. So if I'm setting up my FlexBOSS21, my MPPTs and my battery inputs are all set up the same as a normal inverter?
Yeah, it's all set up just like you would before on the direct current side. The batteries plug in, and of course we've got our busing system on the bottom with the batteries. And then the MPPTs, of course, I think we glossed over this, but the MPPT power is higher now. We have 25, 25, and 15, but I think the 25 is actually 26-ish. All this was nominal. We upped the amperage just a little bit more. So we can handle 5 full strings, and of course the other factor with panels on the inverter is that we can go up to 600 VOC.
Wow. So it sounds like a pretty simple setup, actually.
Very familiar. If you have any kind of experience with the 18 kPV or have been studying that, the solar and the batteries will work the same way. You can just use a little more solar.
Well, let's go back to the smart ports.
Yes.
You talked about them. I would like for you to talk about them a little bit more. What makes them smart? I know that there's 5 programming drivers, and talk to me a little bit more about those and how they're typically used in solar setups. Yeah,
so several things come up when someone's trying to back up a whole house on a smart port. They might have loads that they're heavy and they're capable of draining their batteries pretty fast, and they want to basically build an automatic shedding logic into their system for those heavy loads. So you can have programming drivers like when the state of charge of the battery drops below a certain point, if you are in backup, stop powering those loads. You can have a total override where if you go into backup, do not power those loads. You can also be dealing with situations where you have inverter capacity issues. You know, heat strips can be 10,000 watts a piece. So a lot of homes may have 2 heat strips. That's 20,000 watts. Now, most people doing an energy transition are not planning on using those resistive heat loads. And basically, as the inverter wattage is reached, it can prohibit those heat strips from turning on in a backup situation. Right. So we can also end up situations where, you know, I think a lot of people like to put a water heater on a load shedder. And the reason is because the water heater doesn't have to get power. It's got a reserve tank. So it doesn't necessarily always have to get power that minute. Mm-hmm. And so if we are starting an air conditioner, for instance, and running an oven and a dryer, you know, the more direct use appliances, and our base load's already at, say, you know, 14 kilowatts. Mm-hmm. We don't want the 5,000 watt water heater to trip on, so we could, say, program that smart port to where we're only going to turn on that smart port if the inverter wattage is below, let's just say, 10 kilowatts, right? So if the inverter wattage is below 10 kilowatts, we'll let that water heater have electricity. And if it's not, we're going to turn it off for the time being. So that may only be 30 seconds, maybe a minute. You know, maybe the dryer heating element turns off and we've got power to that water heater. The water heater is a very sheddable load. I don't think like an air conditioner would be a great solution to shed because of its compressor start and stop.
So it really puts the control in the hands of the homeowner to watch their battery use and how they want to use their power.
Yeah, I think many people, if they're looking for backup solutions, they've invested in one FlexBOSS and they've got a GridBOSS that goes with it, will have some creative solutions they can get involved in before they're buying a second inverter. Mm-hmm. So some of that load shed strategy can really help save some money on the inverter, on just how much inverter capacity that you need. You know, I think an electric car charger, you know, I think most people are going to prohibit that unless if they're connected to the grid. If it's an 80 amp one, they may want to just automatically turn it off and manually turn it back on once they've reduced the amperage in an off-grid scenario.
Yeah. Tell me about AC coupling with the smart loads.
Yeah, so I think the thing that we were looking at in the past was number one, with the previous 18 kPV, you can't run a generator and a pre-existing grid tie system into the same inverter. They don't work simultaneously. We didn't have enough of a power control matrix. So we can do that now with the GridBOSS, and I think there's really 2 ways to do that, and one of them is my favorite. The smart loads can be an AC couple connection, and there's a dedicated generator port on the GridBOSS, 125 amps.
That's the highest I've seen for a generator.
It's up to 30 kilowatts of generator capacity. Of course, you can put in a 5 kilowatt generator or really anything that goes with that. But on the AC couple side, you can land it on a smart port, or remember we talked about the connection on the FlexBOSS, right? Mm-hmm. It's the AC input wire goes to the GridBOSS. Well, that leaves the AC output terminals, 90 amp terminals, left open. I think we're actually going to be focusing on putting the AC couple inverters on the AC output of the FlexBOSS. still allowing for generator integration, as we were discussing, but also solving another problem that has plagued the hybrid inverter space, which is dark start.
Okay. So let's say that I did want to AC couple PV on one of the smart ports and have generator input on that 125 amp generator port. Be sending power. Right now I can send power through both of them at the same time.
Yes.
Do you have any safeguards against backfeeding my generator?
Yeah, we absolutely do. We're watching that generator port in terms of the internal design, and we're not going to be able to backfeed that port. I think that we can load shed the AC couple as if we make sure that if we see the battery state of charge climb to a level where there's no place for that energy to go from the AC couple, we can trip that off. It was just a matter of having enough switches to keep such a complex system under control.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about the 200 amp bypass relay again.
Yes.
Now that it's no longer in the FlexBOSS21 and it exists within the GridBOSS, and we've got a lot of power that's bypassing through that relay, how are you meeting anti-islanding, and are you still meeting the requirements of the UL 1741?
Yeah, so the GridBOSS is UL 1741 compliant, so we went and ran it through its own compliance test. Okay. It's also service interest rated when used with a 200 amp breaker. So we ran that through to just really make sure that we had the certifications needed to achieve the target experience, which is you just hang the GridBOSS on the wall by your meter, and you go into it, and then you come out of that GridBOSS and go to your breaker panel.
Still able to have rapid shutdown?
Absolutely. It's actually controlled through the GridBOSS. Very
nice. Now, I'm really impressed with the perfect pairing of the GridBOSS and the FlexBOSS21 and how it's able to have benefits for the installer and the homeowner alike, saving time, reducing installation cost, and even making a nicer, cleaner setup and having flexibility in where you're able to put things. Explain to me again how the GridBOSS is able to manage all of this.
Yeah, well, it's got its own logic controller on it that's just as powerful as the inverter's logic controller. So it's essentially its own citizen on the network, right? In your off-grid system, you have a network of a battery, your inverter, and now the GridBOSS. So the GridBOSS is doing the energy management logic around the entire house. So it has sensors inside of it. It's got a CPU and programming and control software that then talks back to the FlexBOSS and tells the FlexBOSS how to feed the house.
Wow, this is truly amazing. Talk to me about the use cases for the pairing of these two.
Yeah, so I think actually I'm going to start with the simplest one that I'm super excited about because I really do hate when products force you to buy stuff you don't need. The off-grid guys. I love the fact that we've dropped the cost on just the FlexBOSS, where you don't need to buy the GridBOSS. If you want to run, as powerful of a house as you want to off the grid, you could just buy the FlexBOSS and hook it up, and you'll have the most powerful hybrid inverter now on the market that's single phase, and you saved money and you got a better inverter. So and it fits in a smaller space and it looks nicer. So that's a big benefit. On the grid connected side of the market, there were several use cases that we really cared about here. One was, again, the parallel situation where people would install a single 18 kPV, and then to install a second one, because it's a 200 amp integrated inverter, it would be a big rewire job. It would be hang 2 more breaker panels on the wall, which already is cluttered up with your knife switches, your transfer switch, and your AC couple, and your AC disconnect switch. Hang the 2 breaker panels, buy the 100 amp breakers, and hang the second inverter and rewire the whole thing.
And all the time it takes.
Exactly, not to mention your time. So it's at least $800 of hardware. It's a lot of time as well. And we look at the GridBOSS solving that problem, where someone who installs the FlexBOSS and the GridBOSS is future-proof for a second inverter. They will just hang it on the wall, run one 1-inch conduit back to the GridBOSS, put it in breaker number 2 on the inverter side, and then turn the breaker on after they have updated the firmware on the system, and they're good. And that's going to be a huge peace of mind for people investing in these systems. So the upgradability aspect means you don't have to have hours and hours and hours of professional help on some of the most complicated electrical wiring you can do. That's huge for us. And then the AC couple side. When you use the AC output side of the inverter, of the FlexBOSS inverter that normally is freed up for your AC couple connection, you're able to solve the dark start problem. Now what that was, and we saw this in a lot of the hybrid space, and our original 18K had this problem. If you have an existing solar system, again, that this is only focused on existing solar systems, and you landed it on the generator port of the previous 18K, everything's great and fine when you're off grid until, let's say it's 2 in the morning and you've been really using your power aggressively and you're in a worst case scenario where you hit your reserve state of charge. Sure, let's say that's a 10% cutoff, right? Your house hits 10%, the inverter is then going to trip off. Well, the problem that we all face in the hybrid space is, are we going to have to shock the system back to life in the morning, essentially like have it like programmed to, come up in a sunlight hour, so maybe 10 in the morning, right? And re-energize the house so we can hope to re-energize the grid tie inverter. Because remember, grid tie inverters don't produce power unless they see AC power, and your off-grid inverter in this scenario turned off at 3 a.m. because your batteries were empty, essentially. So we had a reserve, and now we use that reserve. It's not a surefire solution, right? We could easily be in a place where or at 10 a.m., we turn on your last 10% of juice, the house comes back with a vengeance because it's been off for 6 hours, right? And, it's got to, all these loads turn on. And so
using more than you can.
Your reserve capacity evaporates in 20 minutes, and your grid tie inverter is just putting in 1,000 watts. So you can't stop that. And then the whole system shuts down at truly zero. And now you got a problem. You got jumper cables. Or you could try to manage this situation by going around and manually doing stuff. So focusing, I'm sorry I had to kind of walk through a lot of points there as to basically how Black Start falls apart with the previous design.
Yeah.
With the new design, it's a little different. And that solves the issue. Because the GridBOSS is separate, and we took the 200 amp switch and put it over there, the GridBOSS is the house loads. And the FlexBOSS is the inverter. So if I hook up my AC couple to my AC output port on the FlexBOSS can shed the house, the GridBOSS, at your reserve state of charge and continue to power the AC output port on the FlexBOSS. So your grid tie inverter, remember, is landed on that AC output port. It can see 240 volt AC power, which idle wattage is 50 watts on the inverter. I can see that nonstop. And so we just engage and disengage the house, but the solar aspect, which is your grid tie inverter, whether it's an in-phase or solar edge system, or just a system you don't want to rewire, stays live and recharges the batteries to the point where they're at your cut-in state of charge, let's say 20% or 25%, and then you can safely re-engage your house.
That makes sense. I'm glad you brought up that point. What other inverters are actually compatible with the GridBOSS?
It's an EG4 product. It has to be so tight of a transfer window. We couldn't make it a universal product. It's got to talk with our inverter and speak exactly the same language because we're counting milliseconds here.
Right. So all of the EG4 products like the 12K, the 18K, and the FlexBOSS21?
That's correct. That's correct. The 12K PV, the 18K PV, and of course the FlexBOSS21. So those three hybrid solutions that we have. And so some people are going to install systems as a self-consumption system and then in the future add the GridBOSS and say, okay, I'll do the whole house backup later. And that may be a stage of project implementation.
Sure.
So I think it'll give people some real flexibility on how to go off-grid over time potentially with the approach you're talking about. The other thing we solved here is the long distance problem. So the batteries on the 18K PV 200 amp style inverter really need to be close to the meter. I mean, if you've got a fortune to spend on 3/0 copper wire, you can, come out of your meter base with 200 amp, go all the way to wherever your 18K PV is and go all the way back to your house, to your house breaker panel. But that's, realistically, it's thousands of dollars to be
it's a lot of copper
in the wrong corner of the house. It can be $4,000 a wire easily to go and move that, and not to mention the labor on that. So with us moving to a single wire going from the 18K PV to the GridBOSS, we were able to reduce the amperage running through that wire to 70 amps. And because our communication line changes modes in milliseconds, we were able to then also make it only one wire. So with that, you can now run a 70 amp service anywhere on your house that you want, and frankly to like, you know, a barn or a garage behind it, put the GridBOSS by your meter panel controlling your house, making this all happen for you, and put your batteries on the other side of your property.
So not only are you spending less money on your inverter, less money on the GridBOSS together even, you're spending less money on wiring and all of your conduit and things like that.
Yeah, you're spending less money on the conduit. You're spending and you're also future-proofing for upgrade.
Sure.
So we just wanted to pay attention to what everybody was asking for in the industry with this shift, and it looks a little different than what people expect for a whole home inverter. But I think that difference is exciting, and it's an opportunity to make solar installations a lot more beginner-friendly. You know, when you look at what people have to go through to hook up, you know, a hybrid system to code on a 200 amp basis, it can be really daunting. The off-gridders, of course, just hook the thing up.
Right.
But, you know, the problem with that was they were paying for that 200 amp switch that they didn't need. And that was, you know, just unfortunate with our goal of making solar and storage accessible to everybody.
Yeah. Well, James, all this is really exciting. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to share.
I think this is a great opportunity to shift the industry in a direction where people can see these installs become easier. I think that this is the most exciting launch we have this year, and that's really it.
I see this as next level for EG4, and that's really exciting. I appreciate you walking us through everything today.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time, Kelly.
Yeah, for sure. And if you'd like to check out the FlexBOSS21 or the GridBOSS or learn more about these products or even order it, check out the description in the links below. For more products, installations, tips, tricks, and insights into your solar journey, be sure to subscribe or even follow us on Facebook at Signature Solar US for all the latest information. I'm Kelly, and this is James Showalter, empowering you to own your own power. We'll see you next time.